Good afternoon. Welcome to the Arkansas edition of our state webinar series, exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or to make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a questions section in the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side. That decouples it from the control panel, and you can then write in your question or comment. We will have a couple of opportunities for questions during the presentation. We are also recording this webinar and will send the link to everyone who has registered. Please feel free to share that recording with others. So let me now introduce myself. I'm Chris Coffin, American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt. Billy is AFT's Senior Director of External Relations and is based in Kentucky. Billy is focused on the expansion of AFT's national initiatives across the Southeast. And for those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress. We are an agricultural land trust, but also focus on promoting sound farming practices through soil health and water quality initiatives. We also recognize that it's not farmland without farmers, so focus on tools and strategies that facilitate land access for next generation producers and assist with farm transfer and succession for retiring farmers and farmland owners. Our programming and research inform our state and federal policy development and advocacy. We have 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. So let me now turn it over to Billy.
Thanks, Chris. We are delighted to be joined today by a number of valued partners, including the Arkansas Department of Agriculture, the Siloam Springs Farmers Market, the University of Arkansas, including Extension and the Center for Farms and Food, the Illinois River Watershed Partnership, the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust, the National Center for Appropriate Technology, and several farmers, students, and others from across the state, and also USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. We thank you all for joining us today. We'd like to recognize and thank NRCS especially for their collaboration and support of this project. They've been an integral partner, as has our research partner in this project, Conservation Science Partners. And now I would like to introduce a very special guest, Secretary of the Arkansas Department of Agriculture, Wes Ward. Thanks so much for joining us, Secretary Ward. We hope that you might share with us your perspectives on the loss of farmland in Arkansas and why the people of Arkansas should care about farmland loss.
Yeah, well, thanks, Billy and Chris, and just very much appreciate the opportunity to join y'all today, and appreciate all the work that's been put into this report. And I think it is an important topic, and I think it's an important topic for Arkansas. If you look at Arkansas, agriculture is our state's largest industry, a $21 billion economic impact that's throughout all corners of the state. It's not confined to one particular area, it's throughout the entire state. And as you look at Arkansas and you see the population growth that we're experiencing, the growth in general, people that see a great state and a great environment, and more people that are that are looking individually to come to Arkansas to live and to work, but also businesses that are looking to Arkansas to expand their operations and to grow. And those are all very positive things. And that's something that has been a focus of a lot of effort from the governor and from others to really grow Arkansas and tie that to being a very rural state, a very agricultural state. So there's a balance there. And so I think this report in particular, gives us information that we need individually as people that are interested in agriculture and participating in agriculture, but also from the department level, the stakeholder level, university level, all the people that we work with throughout the state that are tied to making our agriculture industry so successful. Gives us this a very comprehensive report of things to look at and to be aware of, and gives us some great examples of what other states are doing to make sure that their agricultural land stays in production and continues to be protected. So very timely topic for Arkansas and for us. And so appreciate y'all putting together this report and hosting these webinars to talk through the findings.
Thank you, Secretary. And speaking of our report, we wanted to let you know that we will continue to be a partner with your department, and that this report and this research project will have a third phase, and that is our phase 3, which will project forward to 2040, looking at housing densities, population increases, and climate change, and how those three things may impact farmland loss in the future. This data, unlike State of the States, will be done at the county level. So we can get down to the county level and have multiple counties examining this information so that they can plan for the future of agriculture on a more regional basis. So thank you again, Secretary. Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Billy, and thank you, Secretary, for joining us. And I have to say, I was just on the Department of Agriculture's website today, and I gather it's new and it's beautiful. So I just want to say well done on that front. So let's now talk about the findings from our Farms Under Threat report. Today we're focusing on the State of the States, which is the second in our research series. It paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state, and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who were not able to join us for our launch events in May, let me touch very quickly on our national findings, which you see here. We studied the period from 2001 to 2016. This was a period of historically low housing starts with a deep recession in the midst. Despite that, the US converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's the equivalent to all the land planted in the United States to fruits, nuts, and vegetables in 2017. The majority of that conversion was to low density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big of a threat it is. Importantly, more than a third of the land converted, about 4.4 million acres, was what we have identified as nationally significant land. That's land best suited for intensive food and crop production. As you can see from this next map, agricultural land conversion is a growing problem across the US and especially throughout the South. Cities are sprawling, and the proliferation of farmettes and ranchettes on their outskirts has created hot spots of conversion in virtually every state. So now we're going to actually leave this PowerPoint and dive into our interactive website. We are going to be ably assisted here by Beth Fraser with American Farmland Trust, who is our navigator for this hour. And we're going to start with pointing over this tab over here on reports and data. Here's where you can find the full report. You can find the full score sheet and the things that went into the score sheet and the methodologies about our PVR values and some of the other things that we're going to talk about. Also, if you are interested in gaining access to any of the spatial data that we used, please click on that Geospatial Data Layers tab. It will take you to a form that you can fill out, and we will be back in touch to let you know what is available and when it will be available. So now let's go to the drop-down menu and select Arkansas, which you do right there. And it takes you to both the spatial mapping and the policy scorecard. And we're going to start again on the spatial side. We start here with this downloadable conversion summary document that we'd like to point out to people. We created these 2-pagers because we think that it is always helpful, particularly when you have a big, long report, which is really hard to download, to create an easily downloaded document that has many of the pertinent facts and figures. This can be used to link to on a website or take some of the infographics to use for whatever purpose, share the whole thing with policymakers or your local policymakers, not just state ones, local as well. So many uses to it. There is also a policy summary that you can download as well. So we hope these will be helpful. But now we're going to go back and look at the data layers that are available for Arkansas. We're going to start with land cover and use. We used multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the U.S. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low density residential land use. And you can see that's the orange. The dark red is urban. The orange, tan orange-ish is low density residential land use. We also included for the first time an effort to spatially identify all woodland associated with a ranch or a farm. Our mapping shows 13.77 million acres of agricultural land in Arkansas, including 7 million acres of cropland, 4.9 million acres of pasture land, and 1.76 million acres of woodland associated with farms. There was a tiny little bit of range land in there as well. Let's move to PVR values. So for this report, we wanted to analyze the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So we created, with the help of a national panel of experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PVR values across the state. The darker the green, the higher the PVR value. And the higher the PVR value, the higher the suitability of the land for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. We then took these PVR values and used them to identify nationally significant land. So this next map here shows the nationally significant agricultural land in Arkansas. It's about 8.5 million acres of agricultural land, or 62% of the state's agricultural land base. About 6.4 million acres of this is cropland, with 1.6 million acres in pasture and a little under 500,000 acres in woodland. So the last category we're going to look at is conversion. And again, the time period that we looked at was just 2001 to 2016, so a 15-year period. And we looked at conversion in 2 ways: to urban and highly developed land use, which includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion, so expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas typically found in cities and towns. This category, though, also includes some rural, industrial, and energy production sites, including oil and well pads and large-scale solar installations. The second type of conversion we mapped is low-density residential development, or LDR. And again, this was the first effort of its kind to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. LDR areas can range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. 3/4 of the conversion in Arkansas over this 15-year period, or 201,800 acres, was to low-density residential land use. And a note about this doesn't mean that there's no active agriculture on land designated as LDR. There may be in some places, and some of that small parcel production may be quite productive and profitable. But we also know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land in Arkansas that was considered low-density residential in 2001 was 12 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR increases management challenges for producers who end up farming and ranching in and around non-farm neighbors. Total agricultural land converted over this time period was 267,000 acres. Pasture land accounted for about 2/3 of the conversion, followed by woodland. And again, this is woodland associated with a farm or ranch, with 53,500 acres, followed by cropland with 34,500 acres. And looking at the quality of the land converted, about 42% was land considered nationally significant. We're concerned about the loss of this especially productive land for a couple of reasons. First is from an economic perspective. As producers are forced to more marginal land, their input costs tend to go up and/or their crop yields tend to go down. And from an environmental perspective, the loss of this high quality land creates more pressure to convert woodlots, pastures, and buffer strips to cropland. So reducing conversion of this land to development is critical to making progress on water quality and wildlife habitat goals. So with that, let me stop here and turn it over to Billy for some perspectives about the spatial findings.
Thanks, Chris. I think it's very clear here the amount of nationally significant soils and farmland in Arkansas. And as the commissioner or the secretary said earlier, this is your factory floor of agriculture. What you're seeing here on this map, your PVR land with the dark green and light green, this is the factory floor of agriculture that must be conserved. But what we're seeing here, with the gray being the urban areas and the red being the areas that have been converted over a 15-year period from 2001 to 2016, we can see the sprawl here. And if we could zoom out just a bit on this map. So you can see that really, if you look at this, zooming out a little further, we can see a lot of your highway corridors are where the proliferation is happening. So if you look at Little Rock and you're going to the northeast and the southwest, you can see the sprawl that's occurred throughout that corridor. It's critically important that you have strong planning principles and comprehensive planning in place to plan for the future of agriculture, but to also plan for other forms of economic development. So we see a lot of proliferation of sprawl in Northwest Arkansas. We see it in the Little Rock area, and all these areas where you're seeing the red interspersed with the dark green, that's fragmentation. That's fragmentation of your your economic engine of agriculture. So we're going to get into the tools that can be used to plan for the future of agriculture and other forms of economic development a little bit later during the webinar. Back to you.
Great, thank you, Billy. Before we turn to the policy scorecard, we want to stop and get some input from all of you on the webinar. We're interested in your perspectives on what you think will drive agricultural land conversion in Arkansas over the next 10 to 20 years. And the reason why we ask this now is because depending what people say and think are the causes of conversion going forward, will dictate what policy areas the state might want to focus on. So that's why we ask this question here, because it informs the conversation around policy responses. You can vote for more than one, and if you're having trouble voting, it may be because you're in full screen mode, in which case you need to come out of that mode in order to be able to vote. So we'll stop for a minute and let people take a minute to vote. Okay, Beth, what are we seeing here? All right, I will say we have now done these webinars in more than 20 states, and the trend continues to hold that people consistently say that more and poorly planned residential, commercial, industrial development is seen as a continued driver, but perhaps differently than a generation ago, this transfer of agricultural land to a next generation, and that being a potential point where land might be lost to agriculture, has emerged, and clearly folks here feel that it is a very big threat and something we need to focus on. And just to say, that's not to ignore the rest of these, but weak agricultural viability. American Farmland Trust recognizes that one of the best ways to keep land in farming and ranching is to have profitable farms and ranches. So we appreciate the need for the focus and attention on ways to keep farm businesses profitable. So we understand that that is an important component on as a conversion driver. So with that, let's turn to the policy scorecard. Our intent with the scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address what we've seen as the traditional drivers. So that is poorly planned development, weak agricultural viability, and again, this vulnerability of land when it transfers between generations. AFT's been deeply involved in federal and state ag and conservation policy since our founding, but this is our first effort at a state policy scorecard. We learned a lot. We still have a lot to learn. We know that there are many ways that states support agriculture, and this is not an attempt to score them all. And so on that point, and understanding that people are concerned about weak agricultural viability, we know that the state is doing many things to support agriculture, and that was why I was on the department's website this morning to look at some of those programs, which are impressive, and there are quite a number of them, and it does seem like there is a focus on the viability and profitability of farming. What we wanted to do was to focus on 6 different types of policies and programs that tie directly to the land and address one or more of these conversion drivers. So we looked at 6, you can see them on the left-hand side there. We looked at purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs, often known as farmland preservation programs or purchase of development rights programs. So these are programs that permanently protect farmland and ranch land from non-farm development. They compensate landowners who choose to place a permanent agricultural conservation easement on their property. There are 28 states that have PACE programs, and they're not just a way to ensure that land is permanently protected for future generations, that factory floor, as Billy points out, but they're important economic development and generational transfer tools. And we really want to stress these because it can transform part of an illiquid asset, land, into cash, which frees up money to improve or expand a farm business, to fund retirement, or to facilitate the transfer of land to a new generation without having to sell land for development. And protected land is often more affordable for young and beginning farmers. So we also looked at land use planning and growth management. Most states, including Arkansas, delegate planning authority to local governments, and planning and zoning decisions are driven largely at the county and municipal level. Billy's going to talk about that in a little bit, that local governments must be equipped with a suite of effective tools to support compact development and retain farmland. But states can play an active and important role here in guiding local planning and supporting local governments with the right tools and incentives. And so those are the things that we looked at here. We looked at property tax relief for agricultural land. Every state has some type of preferential use or current use or agricultural use assessment, which is reducing property taxes paid in recognition that farm and forest land require far less in municipal services than the taxes that are typically levied on them. We looked at agricultural district programs. There are 18 states that have these type of programs which encourage landowners to form special areas to support agriculture. These districts differ by state. The protection and incentives vary. Some states limit annexation of land in districts. Others limit use of eminent domain and offer landowners in those districts protection from siting of public facilities and infrastructure. Some offer additional tax incentives to landowners and farmers in the districts, and some require district enrollment to participate in a state farmland preservation program. And then we looked at two different types of programs focused on, again, that generational transfer and land access for next generation farmers. We looked at farm link programs, so those that connect those looking for land or farm seekers with farmers and landowners who want their land to stay in agriculture. We know that these are administered by public and private entities. They can offer a range of services from an online real estate posting to technical assistance and educational resources. We did only look at state-supported programs here, not the quite a number of programs that are being developed by land trusts and other NGOs around the country. And then lastly, we looked at state leasing. So these are programs that make state-owned land available to farmers and ranchers for agriculture. Sometimes that's the primary purpose of the program. More often though, agricultural use is secondary to generating income for another purpose or for promoting wildlife habitat. So looking down now at how Arkansas scores relative to other states, it's got points on the board for 2 of the 6 policies that it has. And what I want to point out here is that some states, especially those on the east and west coasts, have faced rapid loss of farmland for decades. And the high scores here that you see in the blue reflect the actions that they've had to take to stem the rapid conversion of their farm and ranch land. And our point here is that as Arkansas begins to feel this development pressure more intently, it will need to think about how it increases its policy response if it hopes to retain its agricultural land base for a profitable agricultural industry. So the website allows you to dive into the factors behind the scores. We're just going to show you how you can do it a little bit, and let's just do that for land use planning. And again, Arkansas is with quite a number of other states that gets authority, gets points here under state authority for authorizing comprehensive planning. Many other states require comprehensive planning, which may or may not be a requirement that Arkansas is ready to adopt. But there are certainly many other things that states have done. And when you look at these across the top, the state plan for agriculture, again, we feel that a state looking at its resource base, thinking about what its needs are related to land over the next 10 or 20 years is an important exercise. We look at things like farmland protection planning, which is providing a little bit of support and technical assistance at the community level to help people and communities think about what their strategies ought to be around farmland protection and keeping that base, whether it's permanently protected or not. And similarly, in thinking about the support for comprehensive planning, even if it's not a requirement, many states have provided some level of technical assistance to help communities think through what are some of those important elements of comprehensive plans. So let's look, or just thinking about a couple of these other strategies on property tax relief. Again, here Arkansas gets points for having authority for the program. When you look at the components of it, the things that we were looking for is requiring a minimum income threshold for enrollment in the program, or proof that enrolled land is actually in active agricultural use. We feel that these are valuable components of a program. There are also some states that impose rollback taxes or penalties if land is withdrawn from the program within a certain period of time. And some states provide additional property tax relief in exchange for short-term non-development covenants. So let's take just a minute to talk about a couple of the other programs and policies. While Arkansas doesn't have a state PACE program, there is federal funding available for the purchase of agricultural conservation easements through two USDA programs, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. AFT has worked on both of these programs, and we were very happy with the changes to these programs in the 2018 Farm Bill. We hope that the $2 billion provided in the 2018 Farm Bill and some key statutory changes, particularly to the ASIP program, will increase its use in Arkansas. There are a couple of changes in particular we think will be valuable: the elimination of the cash match requirement and the ability to do buy, protect, sell projects. And the National Agricultural Land Network will be providing some additional outreach and programming around doing those buy, protect, sell projects later this year. I also want to stress the value of statewide programming that helps older farmers and farmland owners with farm transfer and succession, especially with finding a younger operator if they have no heirs interested in taking over the family farm. So that's why we've looked at farm linking. We know that some of this programming is often done through cooperative extension or in partnership with NGOs. And I would note that we know that Northwest Arkansas Land Trust does have a farm link program, which is great. We do feel that having state involvement in some way with this type of programming is very important. And we also included state leasing because we feel that making state-owned land available for lease provides opportunities, again, especially for young and new producers. And this is especially important in a state like Arkansas, where there are 4 times as many producers over the age of 65 as there are under the age of 35. In talking with the secretary beforehand, it does seem like the Commissioner of State Lands has active leasing, but though that leasing seems to be focused primarily on mineral leases and timber leases, and it does not appear as if agricultural leasing is really a component of that state office. So I think I will stop there. I hope it was a helpful cruise through the findings. If you have questions, please do write them down. And as we go out of the website, we're going to launch a poll which asks, from your perspectives, which policy or policies you think would be most valuable to focus on for Arkansas. And again, I'm apologize that we were not able to fit all 6 on here. So it's missing the state leasing and it's missing farm link. And if anyone feels that those are the most important things to focus on, please write them in the question panel. Again, we'll take a minute to let people vote. Okay, Beth, what are we seeing here? All right, this is great. Helpful to know that people feel that property tax relief is something to think more about, along with purchase of development rights and some land use planning. We will be, through the National Agricultural Land Network, delving into many of these policies through a series of webinars that are going to start in the early fall. And we hope that folks will join us, because we're really going to dive into what are some of these policies that are being used by some of the states, particularly those with the high scores, and how did they get there, and what makes them effective. So we hope that people will be on the lookout for those policy discussions, and we will send everybody notice of that. We're going to go out for a minute, and this next map that you'll see is the map of protected agricultural land in the US. This was not built into the data layers because there is no national spatial data layer for protected agricultural land. We're building that layer out now. It is good to see that there is a little bit of green dots there in Arkansas, but if you are a land trust that holds agricultural conservation easements and you have not heard from us, please be in touch. Please write your organization in on the question line, and we will be in touch with you, because we're trying to make sure that we capture data from every land trust and state and county program that there is across the country. So with that, Billy, let's stop and see if there are any questions.
Hi, Chris, and thank you. I think it's important to note as we go through here that that land use is different in every state, and you eloquently stated that the policies that some states have are different from the policies in other adjoining states or in other regions. And I think that's indicative of the fact that it is not a one-size-fits-all approach. There is not a single answer. But American Farmland Trust is here to help you work through this process. So on to the question and comment. The most agricultural regions in Arkansas are also the ones that have the least population densities. How do we mobilize the interests of those in more densely populated areas for support of these heavy agricultural interests? So in this case, this goes to what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. It's just critically important that municipalities, regardless of the size, have a planning function so that they have comprehensive planning. And typically comprehensive plans are updated every 5 years to because they're living, breathing documents that enable communities to plan not only for the future of agriculture, but for all land uses, housing, traditional economic development, commercial, and all those different types of development and growth. So comprehensive planning is critical. So to mobilize those areas, I think that we also talk about the cost of community services and how expensive it is to extend infrastructure to less populated areas, and that adds to some of the long-term costs of sprawl, which I'll go into in a minute. But I think just to answer the question very specifically, you mobilize the interests by education and outreach. And that is something that AFT has been doing for 40 years. This can be done through extension. It can be done through social media. And you know, in the age that we're living in, where we have instant access to information, we're going to be sharing this webinar with everyone that's signed up today. So these recordings can be shared across the folks in your area so that they can learn more, along with accessing this information in our microsite so that they can look for themselves. But I'll go into the planning tools a little bit later. That's it for the question, Chris.
Right, can I jump in here too?
Sure.
I think that the other thing is that we are at a unique moment in time. And I will tell folks that when we were thinking about launching this report in May, we were very concerned because it was the idea of launching a report in the midst of a pandemic when people were very nervous and still are very nervous about their health and safety. But we realized that it is a point in time where, for the first time, many people saw empty grocery store shelves. And this has been a wake-up call for a lot of folks about the security of the food supply. And that translates in a number of different ways, but one of the ways that it translates in is the interest that the broader consuming public now has in knowing that there is an availability of food that will be there for them. And that means having the land base to support that food, and then all of the infrastructure that goes along with that and the jobs that go along with that. But the factory floor, as Billy keeps talking about, that has become much more important to many people. So I think now is actually a very good time to be talking about this issue, because it can be linked back to this concern and recognition on the part of the public that we can't always be confident that our food supply is secure unless we take a number of different steps, one of which is to stabilize the land base.
Well, thank you, Chris, and I agree completely. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for us to move forward in our presentation. Chris, you were talking about time. Well, time is not on our side in saving our farm and ranch land, which is why American Farmland Trust just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040, and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. We know that we can get to this goal, and we will need to lock arms with as many partners and practitioners on this call and others around the United States who are deeply concerned about saving the land that sustains us. So now I'd like to discuss some of the ways that American Farmland Trust will be strengthening its commitment to farmland protection across the country and in the South especially. First, establishing the National Agricultural Land Network. Chris has mentioned this, and she'll be discussing it more as we move through the presentation. Second is providing new leadership in key locations. American Farmland Trust is working towards opening 2 new offices in the Southeast. 3, protecting more farmland ourselves and with partners. We know that we have a land trust partner on this call. Our land trust partners are PACE, Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement, and our Purchase of Development Rights partners across the U.S. American Farmland Trust is a resource, and we will help all of our partners however we can reach their conservation goals so that we can double the amount of protected farmland in this country. Advocating for stronger state and federal policies. We have a full-time federal policy team in our Washington, D.C. office, but we also advocate for stronger state policies across the nation on a case-by-case basis, and we want to utilize this data to do more. Promoting research-based decision-making. That's exactly what this data is all about. It's very important that we don't plan for the future for planned land uses, be it agriculture or traditional economic development or housing, without the proper data and research. And then we'll move on to our next slide here. So what we would like to discuss now is what more can Arkansas do? So we would like for Arkansas, because since you have such amazing, productive, versatile, and resilient soils and such a high percentage of nationally significant soils, we would like for you to analyze and map agricultural land trends and conditions in these areas. Strengthen or adopt a coordinated suite of policies, and here I'll spend a little bit of time. Nationwide, the best suite of policies to conserve land long-term is to have comprehensive planning in every county. And it can be merged, ideally, to have city-county planning merged. And I've read one of the comments, we'll get to that question in a minute, about regional planning. However, Arkansas decides to move forward, it's very important that these that you're planning in a comprehensive way, in a document that's adopted by a planning commission, so that planning decisions are made based on recommendations of professional planning staff, but that your appointed planning officials are looking out for the long-term interest of the future, and that they have an awareness of where the state wants to go and where its citizens want to go. The next is to have a goal for farmland protection. Typically, each county, each planning entity would have a goal of farmland protection in their county or in their region. Next, to have urban growth boundaries. Urban growth boundaries have been used in this country since 1958. The city where I'm from, Lexington, Kentucky, had the first urban growth boundary in the United States. And what urban growth boundaries do, all the urban uses, the non-agricultural uses, are inside of that boundary, and agricultural uses are outside of the boundary. So you have urban on the inside and ag on the outside. And what that allows you to do is to build that critical mass of ag land for the future of agriculture. Next is to have agricultural zoning so that non-agricultural uses are prohibited in your rural area, so that you don't have fragmentation of agriculture, that it is your factory floor, that it is strictly for agricultural uses. And next, you have large lot minimums in your rural area. This is critically important, and that's what we're talking about with low density residential. We suggest and recommend viable agricultural units. the 2 acres, the 5-acre lots, the 10-acre lots, the 15, the 20-acre lots. We want larger ag units in your rural area. And that's what I mean when I say to have a large lot minimum in your rural area, so that you have viable ag units for the future of farming and not large residential housing units, McMansions, as you may have heard them characterized as. And then farmland protection, either through a purchased easement program or a land trust program. Our ACEP, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, federal program, AFT helps secure $2 billion for farmland protection. Those funds have to be matched at the local or state level, but land trust can actually get the landowner to accept 50% less for the appraised fair market value of the easement, conservation easement, as the match, so that that landowner can receive cash for his or her easement. And then those are really the suite of policies. And then moving on to support farm viability and access to land, planning for agriculture, not just around it, saving the best, but not forgetting the rest. And so here we're talking about using your best lands for agriculture and using more marginal lands for example, solar siting or other types of uses. Cost of community services, if you go to farmlandinfo.org, you can see that sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes, and ag uses less in services. And I'm being mindful of our time, but those cost of community services studies can be found on our information website, farmlandinfo.org. And we've done over 80 of them, and they all generally say the same. Sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes. Ag uses less. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
Great. Thanks so much. We have time for another question or so, and I want to give the secretary another opportunity just to offer any last perspectives. But Billy, here's a question for you. It relates to, I think, what is a fairly common concern amongst farmers who often live in unincorporated areas of how do they get involved when a municipality is planning big regional projects, but because farmers and landowners are not often part of that governing structure and they're in unincorporated areas, how do they get some representation in those conversations?
Well, I think that goes to your local elected officials. I mean, if farmers are paying county taxes, clearly they should have a seat at the table. And that's, I would reach out to your local representative. If you're represented by council members or by county magistrates, I suggest that you contact your elected representation and have them reach out and connect you with your municipal planning entity, be it local or regional, to make sure that you have a seat at the table. It's very important to stay engaged in these planning conversations, to attend these public meetings that are open to the public. And if you're concerned or if you support a proposal, then you can enter a statement of support into the record, or if you're opposed, you can also enter a statement of opposition, and there are strength in numbers. So I would encourage you to reach out to land trust organizations or land use advocacy organizations in your communities or regions. It may also be helpful to reach out to your local farm bureau. Farm Bureau has a very strong voice, and I think that, I know that they're in touch with certainly planning for the future of agriculture and protecting that factory floor. So unincorporated areas and municipal conversations, this is what we're talking about when having a merged city-county planning function and how important that is. that even if you don't have a merged government, that your planning function is merged so that there's representation on your planning commission, representation from the county and from the cities, so that everyone has an equal voice. And there are resources on how to advocate for planning for the future of agriculture on farmlandinfo.org, and we can share those with you under separate cover. Thanks, Chris.
Great, thank you ever so much. I'm going to take 1 minute because I do want to leave a couple of minutes for the secretary for any final thoughts he might have. I just want to talk about these 2 resources that American Farmland Trust offers. The first is the Farmland Information Center. This is a collaboration we've had with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for decades. It's a national clearinghouse for information about agricultural land. So there's information on there for farmers, for ranchers, for landowners that get to things like, what is an agricultural conservation easement? How would I know what makes it different from a straight conservation easement? And what should I be looking for if I care about keeping land in active agricultural use? It has a farmland protection directory. So if you know of people who are looking for a land trust or a county program to work with, which in Arkansas is probably just land trusts, that you can find that on the website as well. And for those of us who are engaged professionally in this kind of work, it has a wealth of resources from statistics to state and federal policies, if you are looking for, to fact sheets on the cost of community services studies and other cases that we and others have made about why save farmland. So please do look at the Farmland Information Center. You can ask an expert when you go there and type in a question or call on this 800 number. The National Agricultural Land Network is a newly launched project of ours that I will be directing, and it is really intended to build the collective capacity of all of us to be able to do more of this work. We recognize that saving farmland and ranch land requires a lot of expertise, a lot of thinking about what is the best way to do it? What are the best planning tools, as Billy was talking about? What are the ways to do permanent farmland protection? How do you connect that to the need for land access for young and new and first generation farmers? And how do we think about working with landowners about both protecting land and improving things like soil health on that land? So we hope that folks who are interested will join the network. It is free. And that's my email and phone number if you would like to be in touch to talk about it. And with that, let me turn it back over to the secretary. I'm sorry we haven't given you much chance to talk, but if you have any final thoughts you would like to offer, we would be happy to have you do so.
Well, thanks, Chris. And I would just say thank you again to yourself and to Billy for the presentation today and the information. And I would just encourage everyone to go look at the information, the resources that you were just talking about, as well as the State of the States report. I think there's some very useful and beneficial information for us in Arkansas, for those involved within the agriculture industry to look at and think about and start having broader discussions on. So very informative discussion and information today, and just want to say thank you to yourselves as well as the American Farmland Trust for putting all this together. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us. And Billy, I'll just turn it back to you for final word.
Thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Secretary. If you'd like to reach me, my email address is bvanpelt@farmland.org. And I'm also available on LinkedIn. If you'd like to send me an invitation to connect, I'd be happy to answer your questions. And we thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you in the future.